Hi everybody, welcome back once again to the Eastfield Gunroom YouTube channel with me, Matthew Morgan. As ever, this video is proudly sponsored by the British Shooting Show. Now, before we kick off today, I just want to say thank you for all your support, for liking and subscribing to the channel and engaging with us on a weekly basis. If you do enjoy the videos, do give us a like, do hit subscribe because we do appreciate your support. Now today, we are going to be taking a look at one of the most exciting and historical guns we've ever looked at here on the Eastfield Gunroom YouTube channel. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration. Now, we all know that 2025 is the year that Browning celebrates 100 years of the John Moses Browning B25 creation. Let me stop you there. About 6 or 8 months ago, a good friend of mine contacted me. I think it was WhatsApp. I was probably sat there having a Frey Bentos pie or something, and my phone dinged, and he said, I've been offered a really early Browning B25. I'll send you some photos. Sent me the photos, telling me that the serial number was number 51. Straight away I said, not a chance. It's going to be an S1. If you know about B25s, the S denotes a 6, as in the 1960s production of these guns. So I fully expected it to be a 1961 gun that he just got confused over. He sent me the photos, and despite the fact that it was a bit tatty and a bit old and a bit haggard looking, if you like, it was indeed number 51 of the famous Browning B25 Superposed creation. I said to my friend Bert, Browning Bert, we'll call him Bert Ring for short, or in fact for long, whatever you want to call it, you have got to save that gun. It is a historical piece of firearms history. Do what you need to do, but make sure you get your hands on it. And here it is in all its glory. So what we're going to look at today, we are going to look at one of the very first ever John Moses Browning B25 Superposed creations. But before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of history about the great man himself. You can read about John Moses Browning and his accolades, his achievements till the cows come home. There is so much information out there on the internet, more than I ever imagined, and I'll have to be honest, it's really opened my eyes researching for this video about things he did that I never even knew he did. To give you a brief insight, this man is responsible for the Winchester lever action, the Colt 1911, the Browning high power, various other fantastic legendary designs of firearm technology. The one we're going to focus on today is, of course, the B25. Now, John Moses Browning was a firearms inventor. He was a designer. He wasn't a gunsmith per se. And he was born in 1855. And his idea for the superposed, which basically means one on top of another, which is what over and under comes from, was in around about 1909, 1910. Now, in 1925, I believe he started to get the real blueprints of this gun and get the designs on the table. And then sadly, he died in 1926 whilst actually working on another project at his bench in Belgium. We'll come on to how John ended up in Belgium shortly, but first we're going to stick with the whole B25 thing. So sadly, he died in 1926, and then the project was taken on by his son, Val. It took a few more years to get the gun completely finished how they wanted it. And in 1930 or thereabouts, the guns went into production and they started to be exported, initially first to Europe and then to the United States. The gun we're going to look at today has 1930 Belgian proof marks. So how John ended up working with the Belgians and then manufacturing the B25 and of course some of his other inventions is pure chance. It was simply a case of he was visiting another American firearms manufacturer. I think it might have been Colt at the time, and he bumped into the guy from FN Herstal. Now, it came down to the fact that some of the projects that John was working on, the Americans simply didn't want because of their own patents or their own interests, or all to do with royalties, I believe. So during this meeting, he said to this guy from FN Herstal, I've forgotten his name, I apologise for that, but do Google it. I've got this project I'm working on, the Yanks don't want it, and they said, we've got an empty factory, we can build that, no problem whatsoever. And possibly at that moment, the greatest relationship in shotgun and firearms history was made. So that is a brief summary of how we kind of got to the B25. Sadly, John never saw it to come to fruition. It was his son that did the final piece and all the hard work. But over in Belgium, they took on the Superposed and they started to build it in a very high quality specification, because in the 1930s, if you wanted to own an over and under shotgun at the time, we're talking about a world that was completely dominated by side-by-sides. You would have had to have gone to one of the finest London makers like Boss, like James Woodward, because that's the only place you would get anything like that kind of design and that kind of patent. So initially, The Superposed, the B25, was built as a luxury item, but it soon caught on. And of course, when they started manufacturing quite a lot, the cost came down considerably. And the first batch of about 400 guns that was imported into Europe via a company called La Personne, we believe this gun was part of that batch. So, onto the gun itself. This is what was probably called a standard model, later known to a lot of people as kind of an A1, in that it's got a plain black action. It's got very minimal border engraving. Of course, if you wanted something more bespoke or more ornate, you could go for the early Midas grades and that kind of stuff. But this was the initial production gun of the 1930s. So we've got black action. You'll notice straight away it's got a double trigger, because let's not forget, at the time these guns were developed pretty much solely for game shooting. Clay target shooting wasn't really a thing, and for the odd person that I think was going out and shooting, was it feathers in glass balls back in those days? They'd be using side by side. This was a revolutionary design. I cannot put any more emphasis on the word revolutionary, apart from keep saying the word revolutionary. So we look at the underside of the gun. Now remember, this gun is completely handmade, as all B25s were, particularly in the very, very early days. And you can see you've got where the barrels lock into place, and you've got that locking bar that comes straight out from the bottom of the action, which we are all aware of today in the manufacturers of Miracu's, Japanese-made Browning. It's a very, very, very famous design. So completely plain again. Blue trigger guard. Now, I've pointed out at the start of the film, this gun has been very sympathetically restored to try and keep it as original as possible, but also to maintain the fact that it's a historical piece and it needs to look something like. We've got border scroll work on the trigger guard around the outside of the action. And if we look at the top of the action, we've got this little feathered fences, which again, they was carried on for years and years, right into the 70s, 80s on B25s. On top of the action itself, where the top lever is, we have got the FN logo and this little like shamrock design, kind of a leafy thing with everything. Again, everything was completely hand done, all the pressing, all the action filing, all the engraving. You won't get many of these guns with the FN logo on the top lever. Obviously, it's only the early ones. And the pièce de résistance on the back of the backstrap, there it is in all its glory, number 51. The backstrap itself is a Y-shaped design, which again denotes that it's a very, very early gun. Later on, late 60s, maybe early 70s, they moved to a U-shape or a V, some people like to call it, and it's one of those things that's indistinguishable between an early and a late gun. I mean, when you close this gun up, despite the fact it's nearly 100 years old, you can get that very satisfying B25 clunk, which is not dissimilar to if you picked up a 70s or 80s gun. It's the whole feel of a B25. And when you try to explain to me about B25s and what it is about them, that kind of epitomizes for me, it's all about the feel and of course the balance and the handling. Now, another sign of a very, very early gun, this gun has actually got a monoblock barrel design. Browning moved on, I don't know when, but they went to chopper lump, and of course they then continued that through the Japanese made guns with the collaboration with Miracu. But very, very early B25s, you can actually see the lump of the monoblock, where of course the tubes were sweated into those early design guns. We've got a little bit of border engraving on the barrel wings, and unusually we've got this kind of ramped rib with these semi vents on the top. They're not ventilated all the way through. This one is a 30-inch game gun, choked, I believe half and full it was out the factory. Someone has sadly added a center B, which of course takes away from the originality, but it is what it is. This is a historic piece, and the rib itself I think is 8mm parallel, like I say, with this little slight ramp on the end. I would imagine a lot of these early guns were kind of very much a mix and match. We'll do some with this rib and some with that rib, and because ultimately it was a new product, it was coming to market, and they had to experiment to find out what people wanted in terms of their shooting desires. One of the other dead giveaways, this is an early gun, is every single part of the gun has got the number 51 engraved on it, got it stamped on it. It's on the ejectors, it's on the inside of the action. But these early guns have got a very different looking ejector. It's not dissimilar to the later guns in that it's a two-piece with the dog and the leg, as I like to call it. But you've got the addition of this, looks like Lego block attached to the top of the each ejector on each side. Chamber length 70mm or 2 3/4 inch chambers, which again is pretty interesting because this was built at a time when everything largely, certainly here in the UK, was of course 65mm, all the old English side-by-sides, etc. Whereas over in the States, there was a bit more going on in terms of ammunition manufacture, and they were already years ahead with 2 3/4 inch chambers. On top of the barrel, we've got engraved Fabrique Nationale, and of course the address Herstal, Belgique. Again, all done completely by hand. I did mention about the gun bearing 1930 Belgian proof marks. There are some UK proof marks on it as well, but because the gun is quite old and it's been quite well used, we can't actually distinguish what they are. But we're going to go with the fact that it's a very early gun. It bears all the early numbers, early proof marks. What more evidence do you need? From the factory, of course, this gun was completely blued in terms of all the furniture, the action, etc. So we've got blue trigger guard, blue triggers, blued action and barrels, and also in the forend we've got this horseshoe shape, this metal insert. Of course, this has all been redone because it was simply a question of retaining this gun as it is such a historical piece. Final point on the barrels, due to, of course, the age of the gun nearly being 100 years old, it isn't, of course, chrome lined. So back in the day, if you owned one of these, you would have to be pretty on top of the whole cleaning thing, which potentially, not measured the bores, but that's why it's probably been reproofed in the UK, because it's probably hit its limit, had to have some work done on the barrels, and then been subsequently reproofed. This 30 inch, which is quite unusual because, again, go back a long way, 26, 28, even 25 inch guns were popular. So to get a 30 inch, my initial thought was maybe it's something like a live pigeon gun. It weighs 7.5 pounds. Now, if you compare that to kind of a lightweight side-by-side at the time, it's a big chunk difference. So it might have been designed for potentially some live pigeon shooting, some very early trap shooting, who knows. But I think certainly the 30 inch for me is a giveaway. It was one of those two things. So how does this 100-year-old B25 test in terms of balance? It's probably a little bit barrel heavy. Again, this was almost like a prototype because it's such an early gun. So you would imagine that they were all slightly different in terms of the barrel weight to stock weight, etc. But don't take anything away from the fact that this is a very special gun. Onto the wood. Now, sadly, this gun has been chopped and refitted with the original stock. It's got a very nice piece of wood. I've seen a few early B25s, nothing as nice as this, to be fair. We've got semi-pistol grip stock, very skinny in the grip with double point checkering, full length tang going from the trigger guard to the knob end of the pistol grip. And just going back to the stock itself, when I first saw the photos of this gun, it was absolutely horrific. Someone had gone to cheap, ill-fitting buttpads.com and bought a multi-pack, and they were all bodged on the back end. What we've done, we've tried to salvage it as best as possible, which means the stock is still a little bit short, but with the help of the top quality workmanship that's been carried out on this gun, it still looks fantastic. It's got a checkered butt plate. I'm not sure that would have been how the gun was first manufactured. I think the early B25s, like the A5s, etc., would have had a horn or some kind of animal heel butt plate on the end. But very nice it is, though. Now, another interesting feature of this particular gun is the top of the comb is actually fluted. Now, I first looked at this and I thought that's probably aftermarket, but it's so symmetrical, and the fact that the stock is original, I would say it probably actually came out the factory like that. Of course, the oil finish and the rechecker and the cleaning of the checkering has been done recently because the gun has been revived and given a new life. And if we look at the forend design, which is very interesting, even today, the whole flat-sided forend with like Parazzis and Brownings, almost square design, is becoming very popular. They were doing it 100 years ago. This is the original design. So there's no tulip, there's no schnabel, there's nothing on it. It's just all about being practical and fitting in the hand nicely. Again, we've got double point checkering, an extra diamond at the back here. Could I say that's original or not? Absolutely not, but who cares? I'm just happy to have this in my hands. So in terms of the forend operation, this is one of John Moses Browning's many patents. And even if you look at a 1970s gun, they are very similar. So you basically pull the catch down like so, and the forend slides forward and it retains on the gun while the action is removed. Super clever, and at the time completely unheard of in terms of any kind of firearms design. So yeah, again, you've got number 51 on the original forend catch. 51 on the ejectors. This gun is really, really something else. Sadly, if you're a B25 owner, you will know one of the Achilles heel of these guns is that they tend to crackle on the forend. And this one, although it's got a repair done to it, it does have a historical crack. Final point in terms of the operation of the gun, it's actually got a manual safety. Now the safety is so skinny and so small. If you'd had big hands, you'd miss it completely. I mean, when you look at the newer guns and how things developed, it's really interesting to see these differences. But at the time, if that is original and it hasn't been converted, again, for me, that would point to the fact that this was probably a gun that was built for live pigeon shooting or some kind of very early clay target shooting, because of course that would have a manual safety as standard. So to summarize, and the reason I got so excited about this Browning is I believe it is the earliest surviving example we have here in the UK. You can do a bit of Googling. There are probably a few more in the States that actually predate this gun, but let's not forget that the majority, after the first kind of couple of shipments, they did go to the States. We had a lot less here in Europe than they did in America, because let's not forget there's a lot more people in America, a lot more shooters. And it's such a significant piece of history as far as I'm concerned as a shotgun enthusiast. When you look back at what this man did for shotgun and firearm design, it is absolutely off the scale. The Browning high power, the BAR, the lever action Winchester, the Browning auto fire, which is a gun we'll look at in another video, which was another massive success, and a gun that has left such a mark in the world of shooting. So from my point of view, you look at this and you think, without this gun and without that chance meeting between the guy from FN and John Moses Browning himself, we wouldn't have any Browns, we wouldn't have any Winchesters, we wouldn't have any Remingtons to a point, because he was instrumental at the time in the manufacture and the design process of so many different things, many that you wouldn't even know until you actually start Googling or start researching it. I struggle to kind of put into words, like I said, as a shotgun enthusiast, how pivotal and how important this gun is, because as a gun nut, you can't even begin to wonder what life would be without all those fantastic guns that we just kind of take for granted. You know, you go into a shop, there's 100 Miracles to choose from. Without this, that wasn't possible. It would never, ever have happened. And that's why John Moses Browning, to me, and to, of course, most people that know about guns and love guns, is the most important figure the gun world has ever seen. So that has been probably the most important gun we'll ever look at on the Eastfield Gunnery YouTube channel. If you've got something you think trumps this, I want to know about it, because I think it's highly unlikely. John Moses Browning, I urge you to do more research on him, because he was a fantastically interesting man. Very talented, as you can see. If you want any more details on this particular gun, if you've got any questions on this gun, please feel free to drop me an email or comment below. Don't forget to check out the website. This gun is not on the website. It should really be in a museum, in my opinion. I would love to keep it, although I'm pretty sure that Burt Ring is going to keep it forever in his private collection of many special Brownings. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you have enjoyed this video. It seemed so poignant to do it this year, because it's a 100-year celebration of the B25. What better way to celebrate, rather than regurgitating 825 videos like other channels are doing, than get a historic piece and bring it to your attention. This video proudly sponsored by the British Shooting Show. Who knows, we might even be able to get this gun on the stand for people to come and look at and enjoy in February. So don't forget to put your tickets. So from me, Matthew Morgan, at the Eastfield Gun Room, and this truly remarkable piece of firearms history, I'll see you next time.